This is take of 207 of ending superpowered processes in our time. So today we're talking about control plane security and compliance processes that have their own risk because of the way they were designed, because they actually have to have access to everything. Right. So typically, and they're designed that way. They are, the requirement is they have access to everything. That doesn't mean the implementation has to have access to everything from a single point. We're going to talk about this, but they are globally reaching concepts. And the question is, how do we build those where they're not their own risk? And the examples to these, to me, are sensitive data scanners, data catalogers, deployment tools. Tokenization and encryption is one that's hard to get away with because it tends to have a central store. But the first three are obviously the ones that really do this. Sensitive data scanners, because they need to see all the data in the whole company to figure out where there's sensitive data. The data catalogers, because they're creating metadata descriptions and catalogs about the data, and you got to read a couple rows of the data to be able to scan it. And a lot of times we read multiple rows, like in the data lake, to see if there's version skew, and so they tend to end up with access to a lot of the data. We're looking at deployment tools because they got to deploy stuff, so that means they push code out everywhere. And a lot of times we'll do that with a very broad set of keys, because what could go wrong if the deployment tools did the wrong thing, or somebody got control of that? I saw an accidental push at one company and we lost 500 apps, 10,000 servers in 2 hours, because we had deployment tools at the center that were deployed all together, and that blew everything up. They didn't do a rolling, which would have fixed it, but I'm just saying that's an example. To tokenization and encryption is another one. You actually got to see all the data to do that. And that one, because you might do the data in an isolated fashion, it might not be as bad, whereas sensitive data scanners actually look at the whole record. So they have individual fields may not be damaging by themselves, but because you won't know how they're linked together. But when you've got the other ones, the sensitive data scan and the data catalogers, those actually end up seeing all the data together, and they are an awesome way to steal data or lose data. So, or leak, it goes into the logs or something bad. So typically what happens is we have these three divisions, wildly well named, X, Y, and Z. They have data lakes, they've got archive data, and they've got compute deployed to them, and they've got their own key management system because they're really cool people that did the right thing. But the data catalogers and the sensitive data scanners and deployment tools came along, and they said, man, we really need to deploy stuff from the control plane or the management plane, really, and push that into these data planes and the deployment planes. And guess what? What we do, the simplest way to do that usually is you give those folks the super key, and that key now can be, because they got to reach everywhere and the keys are hard to manage. So what we end up doing is we just kind of create a couple powerful keys. I drew them all as gray here, but really they'd be one data catalog key, one sensitive data scanner key, and one continuous deployment key. And everybody in division X, Y, and Z would enable those keys down in theirs to give access, because they're special processes and no users are in them. And that's the kiss of death, right? When you end up in a ransomware attack. So here, we might end up with three keys, one for each of those, but sensitive data scanner and data catalog are probably owned by the same team, so the most we'd end up with is two. So here we are, we see that we have a key leaking problem across there, so we don't want to do that. I would say this is the most common deployment pattern for these tools. And at least my limited experience, across maybe 10 orders. So the next one is separate keys, because we're like, hey, every division will have its own key, and we're just going to cough up a key, and that way nobody can touch my stuff because I'm going to use a special key, and I got rid of that gray key. And now what happens? Well, it turns out that the data catalog, the sensitive data scanner, or the deployment tools, or any of the others actually end up with a key from everybody. So they just have a giant key ring, right? And because they have a giant key ring, they can see everything. And guess what? The net advantage is not very big. Yeah, if somebody steals a single key, you're not dead. But basically, anybody that ends up in one of those processes has access to everything again. And so my argument is this is better than nothing, but it's an anti-pattern, right? And I've seen this blow up too. You end up in an attack in one of these environments, and it coughs up data access keys to everywhere. Or in the deployment case, you end up with deployment keys, and then you can take down everything, because if you can deploy it, you can undeploy it. So then we go and look, what my pretty much convinced is the right way to do this is, well, there are probably other ways, and I'm open to suggestions why this one's bad, and it's basically federated. And so the only debate, what we do is we take all the sensitive data access processes and we push them down into the divisions so that the keys to that data don't leave the division, and only the metadata or control plane actually end up getting sent back to the central area. So the data catalog still gets set up and the sensitive data scanner still identifies sensitive data and the deployments can still happen, but they're basically proxied essentially, but better, because they're actually controlled down at the division level, and we create some reusable packages to do this deployment, and we deploy them there. And the right way to do this is we can initiate an action from the control plane or the deployment plane, management plane, and the divisional control management plane will actually receive that message and make it happen so that nobody can reach down in there. They can just start off a process and get the results, or they can stream back the results, or it could be scheduled. It doesn't really matter. Basically, the idea is the keys for the division never leave the division, the work's done there, and then you just got to debate over which team owns the deployment of these components down into the division level. Sometimes the division will own it. Sometimes the team that owns that lake attribute will own it. Sometimes the central team will do it, but that gets weird because then you got to make sure you didn't break the isolation. So this is it. The idea is central places, the central processes here managed by the central teams or the corporate level. Those are basically just control planes and aggregators. And the actual work done is done in a control and management plane down in the bottom, owned by the division itself. So that's it. Like I said, our goal here is to end superpowered processes and find a way to do that where we retain flexibility and deployment and the power of those tools, while at the same time not creating basically accounts and roles that turn out to give you access across the entire company. Have a great day.